The morning of his wedding should have been the happiest day of Alexandru Ionescu's life. Instead, it became the beginning of the greatest mistake he would ever make. Standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of his luxury penthouse overlooking Bucharest, Alexandru adjusted the cuff of his tailored navy blue suit. Down below, expensive black cars were already lined up outside the building, waiting to escort him to the ceremony. His phone vibrated non-stop. Congratulations from business partners, messages from celebrities, calls from journalists eager to cover what everyone was calling the wedding of the year. At just 35 years old, Alexandru had built one of Romania's fastest-growing technology companies. His fortune was worth millions, his face appeared in magazines, and people admired him as the perfect example of someone who had built an empire from nothing. At least that was the story everyone believed. No one knew that there was one chapter of his life he refused to speak about. Whenever anyone asked about his father, his expression changed instantly. "I don't have one." That was always the end of the conversation. His fiancée, Andreea Marinescu, had noticed it many times. A few weeks before the wedding, while they were reviewing the guest list together, she had looked up from the table and quietly asked, "Are you absolutely sure you don't want to invite your father?" Alexandru didn't even hesitate. "No. But he's still your father." "He stopped being my father a long time ago." She studied his face. "You've never told me what really happened." "I don't want to." Andreea reached for his hand. "You don't have to tell me if it hurts." "It doesn't hurt." He looked away toward the city skyline. "It doesn't matter anymore." She didn't ask another question. She loved him enough to respect the silence. The ceremony was held at one of the most beautiful castles in the Carpathian Mountains. Elegant gardens surrounded the historic building. Hundreds of white roses decorated the pathways. A string orchestra played softly as guests arrived, wearing designer suits and evening gowns. Luxury cars continued to pull up one after another. Everything looked perfect, exactly the way Alexandru wanted it. As photographers rushed toward him, flashes illuminated his confident smile. He greeted investors, shook hands with politicians, accepted congratulations from old friends. Everything was under control. Until one of the security guards hurried toward him. "Mr. Ionescu." Alexandru turned. "What is it?" "There's an elderly gentleman at the front gate." "So?" "He says he's your father." The smile disappeared from Alexandru's face. For several long seconds he didn't move. Finally he asked, "What does he look like?" "He's wearing an old suit. Very clean, but obviously worn. He's holding a small wooden box and a bouquet of white flowers." Alexandru clenched his jaw. Who let him get this close? He insisted he was family. Without another word, Alexandru walked toward the entrance. Every step felt heavier than the last. Outside the gate stood an elderly man with silver hair and tired eyes. His suit had clearly been worn for many years, but it had been carefully pressed. In one hand he carried a bouquet of simple white flowers. In the other, a small wooden keepsake box. The moment he saw Alexandru approaching, a gentle smile appeared on his face. "Happy wedding day, son." Alexandru stopped several feet away. His expression remained cold. "What are you doing here?" Ion lowered his eyes for a moment. "I know I wasn't invited." "Then why did you come?" "I only wanted to see you." "You've seen me." "I also brought something for you." He carefully lifted the wooden box. "I've kept this for many years, waiting for the day you got married." Alexandru didn't even look at it. "I don't want anything from you. It's important." "Not to me." Around them, guests had begun to notice the confrontation. Conversations slowly faded. Several people discreetly pulled out their phones. Andrea noticed the growing tension and quietly walked closer. "Alexandru." He raised one hand without looking at her. "Please, don't." Ion took one cautious step forward. "I only need 1 minute." "You've already had enough of my time." "I came to tell you that I'm proud of the man you've become." Alexandru laughed bitterly. "Proud? You don't get to be proud." "I know I made mistakes." "You disappeared from my life." Ion slowly shook his head. "No, Yes. You don't know the whole truth. I know everything I need to know. You don't. I watched my mother struggle alone while you were gone. Ion's eyes filled with sadness. If only you knew why. I don't care why. Silence. A painful silence. Finally, Alexandru turned toward the security guards. Remove him. One of the guards hesitated. Sir, I said remove him. Ion gently raised one hand. It's all right. He looked at Alexandru one last time. I hope one day you'll understand. I already do. No. Ion's voice was almost a whisper. You only know part of the story. Alexandru turned his back. I don't want to hear another word. The security guards slowly escorted the elderly man toward the street. He didn't resist. He simply held the wooden box against his chest. Before disappearing beyond the gate, he looked back one final time. I truly hope your life is filled with happiness. Alexandru never answered. The gate closed between them, and with it, the last chance for a father to speak the truth. Andrea stood silently beside her husband-to-be. After a long moment, she whispered, I don't think he came here to hurt you. Alexandru stared straight ahead. It doesn't matter. He's still your father. He stopped being my father years ago. She noticed something strange. His hands were shaking, not from anger, from something much deeper, something he refused to admit. The ceremony began only minutes later. The music played. The guests applauded. The cameras flashed endlessly. Alexandru smiled in every photograph. But deep inside, he couldn't stop seeing the image of an old man walking away with a small wooden box that no one had opened. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Ion boarded a train heading toward Brasov. The wooden box rested quietly on his lap. Across from him sat an elderly woman who had watched everything in silence. Your son didn't take the gift? Ion smiled sadly. No. Will you try again? He looked out the window as the train slowly began to move. Not this time. So what will you do? Ion gently placed one hand on the box. Sometimes, he paused. Time has to tell the truth before people are ready to hear it. He glanced at the calendar on his phone. Only 7 days remained. And after those 7 days, everything Alexandru believed about his own father would begin to fall apart. The wedding celebration lasted long into the night. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the grand ballroom, while a live orchestra filled the castle with elegant music. Guests laughed. Champagne flowed endlessly. Everywhere Alexandru looked, people admired what he had built, his company, his success, his perfect new life. Yet despite the applause and congratulations, he couldn't enjoy a single moment. Every time the music slowed, the image returned. An elderly man standing quietly outside the gate, holding nothing but a small wooden box and a bouquet of white flowers. He tried to push the memory away. It refused to leave. Later that evening, Andrea found him standing alone on the castle's balcony overlooking the mountains. She wrapped a coat around her shoulders before walking beside him. You've been out here for almost 20 minutes. I just needed some air. She leaned against the railing. You've barely smiled since... She stopped herself. Alexandru finished the sentence. Since he showed up. She nodded. You keep saying he doesn't matter. He doesn't. Then why can't you stop thinking about him? Alexandru remained silent. Far below, the lights of the valley shimmered in the darkness. Finally, he spoke. When I was 12, he paused. I waited outside our apartment for almost 3 hours because I thought he was coming back. Andrea looked at him carefully. He never came. I told myself that if he ever appeared again, I would never forgive him. His voice was calm, too calm. Sometimes pain became quieter instead of louder. The following morning, the newlyweds left for Sinaia. The drive through the mountains should have been peaceful. Instead, silence filled the car. Every now and then, Andrea glanced toward Alexandru. He kept both hands tightly on the steering wheel, lost in thought. She finally broke the silence. Can I ask you something? If you have to, what was your father like before everything changed? Alexandru didn't answer immediately. For several miles, only the sound of the engine could be heard. Then, almost unwillingly, memories began to surface. He taught me how to ride a bicycle. He smiled for the briefest moment, and every time I fell, his smile disappeared. He told me to get back up before I started crying. Another long silence. He wasn't always the man I remember now. Andrea looked out the window. People usually aren't. Meanwhile, nearly 100 miles away, in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Brasov, Ion stepped into his small garden. Every morning he watered the roses himself. It was the one habit he had never abandoned. His elderly neighbor, Elena, leaned over the fence. "So," Ion smiled softly, "I know what you're going to ask. Did you see him?" "Yes." "And?" "He asked security to throw me out." Elena lowered her eyes. "I'm so sorry." Ion slowly shook his head. "Don't be. How can you say that?" "He reacted exactly the way I expected. You still love him." "I never stopped." Elena sighed. "You could tell him everything." Ion looked toward the old wooden box resting on the porch. "Not yet." "Why?" "Because if the truth comes from me," he smiled sadly, "he'll think I'm asking for forgiveness. And if it comes from someone else, he'll finally believe it." Back in Sinai, Alexandru couldn't sleep. Around 5 in the morning, he quietly left the bedroom and walked onto the hotel balcony. The mountains were still covered in mist. He closed his eyes. Without warning, a childhood memory returned. He was 8 years old. His father had surprised him with a small electronic keyboard because Alexandru loved music. "I can't afford a real piano yet," Ion had said with a smile, "but one day you will." Alexandru remembered how excited he had been. He also remembered practicing every evening while his father applauded after every song. His eyes opened suddenly. Why am I remembering this now? Behind him, Andrea had quietly stepped onto the balcony. Because memories don't disappear. They're just buried. He looked away. "I don't understand anything anymore." When they returned to Bucharest, the internet was still talking about the wedding. The video of the confrontation had gone viral. Millions of views, thousands of comments. Some defended Alexandru, others condemned him. But one comment caught the attention of his business partner, Mihai. It simply read, "Don't judge the old man until you know who he really is." The account disappeared only minutes later, almost as if someone had posted the message, only to plant a seed of doubt. The next morning, Alexandru arrived at his office earlier than usual. Fresh flowers covered the reception area. Employees congratulated him as he walked through the building. Everything looked exactly as it always had. Perfect, organized, successful. Yet for the first time in years, he felt completely distracted. His financial director, Mihai, knocked on the office door. "Do you have a minute?" Alexandru nodded. "Something happened yesterday." "What?" "A notary came looking for you." Alexandru frowned. "A notary?" He wouldn't explain why. "What did he say?" "He only asked me to give you this." Mihai handed him a business card. The name printed across the top read, "Victor Dumitrescu, public notary" on the back. A handwritten message. "It is very important that we meet before the end of the week." Alexandru turned the card over several times. "This doesn't make any sense." Mihai hesitated. "There's something else." "What?" "He said—" Alexandru looked up. "Your father asked him to contact you." The room suddenly felt much smaller. "My father?" "That's exactly what he said." Alexandru stared at the business card for several long seconds. Why would his father hire a notary? Why now? And why wait until after the wedding? Questions he had ignored for nearly 3 decades suddenly demanded answers. He slipped the card into his jacket pocket. For the first time since his wedding day, a small crack appeared in the wall of certainty he had built around his past. And somewhere deep inside, a question he had never allowed himself to ask finally emerged. What if I was wrong? Alexandru stared at the business card for the rest of the day. No matter how hard he tried to focus on meetings, contracts, or financial reports, his mind kept drifting back to one question. Why would his father contact a notary? Late that evening, after Andrea had fallen asleep, he finally picked up his phone and dialed the number. The call was answered almost immediately. "Victor Dumitrescu speaking." This is Alexandru Ionescu. I've been expecting your call. Alexandru's voice was cold. My assistant said you wanted to see me. Yes. Tell me why. I'm afraid I can't explain everything over the phone. Then at least tell me who sent you. There was a brief silence. Your father. Alexandru closed his eyes. I don't understand. You will. When? 7 days after your wedding. Alexandru's heart skipped a beat. Exactly the same words his father had spoken before leaving the castle. There are documents that were entrusted to me many years ago. What kind of documents? I promised your father I would only hand them to you today. Alexandru remained silent. If you truly want the truth, the notary continued, come to my office tomorrow morning. The line went dead. The following morning, Alexandru arrived nearly half an hour early. The office was small and old-fashioned. Wooden bookshelves covered every wall. Sunlight filtered through cream-colored curtains. The room smelled faintly of old paper and polished oak. Victor Dumitrescu greeted him warmly before placing a thick brown folder on the desk. I've kept this for almost 28 years. Alexandru looked at the folder without touching it. What's inside? The truth. The notary slowly untied the blue ribbon holding it together. Inside were dozens of documents, bank transfers, receipts, letters, old legal papers, family photographs. Alexandru frowned. I don't understand. Victor picked up the oldest document. When you were 8 years old, your mother became seriously ill. Alexandru looked up immediately. My mother told me she simply needed treatment. She protected you from the reality. The notary continued. Your father's business collapsed while he was trying to pay for her medical care. He sold nearly everything he owned to make sure she received the treatment she needed. Alexandru's breathing slowed. He accepted a long-term construction contract overseas because it was the only way to support your family financially. Then why didn't he come back? He wanted to. Victor handed him another document. But your parents agreed on something neither of them ever told you. Alexandru unfolded the paper. It was an old legal agreement, signed by both of his parents. He stayed away because your mother believed it would hurt you less if you grew up believing he had left, rather than watching him disappear over and over again for work. Alexandru shook his head. No. The decision was made together. Victor opened another envelope. This is every financial transfer your father made during your childhood. Alexandru stared at the dates. Every year, every school semester, every birthday, every Christmas. There were payments for school tuition, books, medical insurance, music lessons, a computer, his first bicycle, university expenses, everything. His hands began to tremble. I thought, his voice broke, my mother paid for all of this. She raised you with incredible love, Victor replied softly. But she was never alone. Alexandru couldn't speak. For nearly 30 years he had believed his father had abandoned him. Now every page in front of him proved exactly the opposite. Victor carefully slid one final envelope across the desk. This letter is addressed to you. On the front were only 6 handwritten words. To my son, on the day he finally learns the truth. Alexandru opened it with shaking hands. My dear son, if you're reading this, it means life has finally brought you to this moment. I never wanted you to hate your mother. She loved you more than anything in this world, and every decision she made was because she believed it would protect you. Please don't blame her. I was never absent from your life. I watched every achievement from a distance. I celebrated every success you never knew I witnessed. Every schoolbook, every opportunity, every dream you followed, I helped make them possible. Not because I expected gratitude, because that is what fathers do. On your wedding day, I didn't come asking for forgiveness. I came hoping for one hug. When you told me to leave, I understood. You were judging a story you had only heard from one side. If after reading this letter, you choose never to see me again, I will still be proud of you. But if you decide to come, you'll find my front door unlocked, just as it has been every single day for the last 27 years. With all my love, Dad. The letter slipped from Alexandru's hands. Tears blurred every word. His chest felt impossibly heavy, not because he had discovered the truth, because he realized he had humiliated the one man who had quietly sacrificed everything for him. Without saying another word, he stood up. "Where does he live?" Victor smiled gently. "I thought you might ask." He wrote down an address in Brasov. Alexandru took the paper. This time, he wasn't driving toward a meeting. He wasn't chasing another business deal. For the first time in years, he was chasing the chance to make things right. Alexandru left the notary's office without saying a single word. The letter was still clutched tightly in his hand. He had built billion-dollar deals with complete confidence. He had negotiated contracts under enormous pressure. He had faced investors who wanted to tear his company apart. Yet nothing had ever made his hands shake the way they did now. For nearly 30 years, he had believed one version of the story. And within a single hour, everything he thought he knew had collapsed. He got into his car and entered the address the notary had written on the small piece of paper. Brasov, 3 hours away, 3 hours that felt longer than the past 27 years. The drive was unusually quiet. He turned off the radio, silenced every notification on his phone. For the first time in years, he wanted nothing except his own thoughts, but his memories refused to leave him alone. One after another, they returned with painful clarity. His father teaching him to ride a bicycle, holding the back of the seat until Alexandru found his balance, running behind him with a smile. The evenings they spent building wooden model airplanes together, the weekends in the park, the first keyboard his father had proudly brought home. At the time, those memories had seemed ordinary. Now, they felt priceless. How had he managed to erase them so completely? How had anger become stronger than love? His phone suddenly rang. It was Andrea. "Alex?" He took a deep breath. "I'm driving." "Where are you?" He hesitated. Then, for the first time, he answered honestly. "I'm going to see my father." Silence. Finally, she whispered, "I was hoping you'd say that. I know everything now." "No." His voice cracked. "I actually know nothing." She could hear him struggling to breathe. "Do you want me to come with you?" He looked at the empty highway stretching toward the mountains. "No. I think this is something I have to do alone. I'm proud of you." "I'm not." Another long silence followed. "I'll call you later." Late that afternoon, Alexandru finally entered a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Brasov. There were no luxury villas, no expensive cars, no security guards, only small houses surrounded by colorful gardens. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalk. Neighbors greeted one another from their front porches. It was a world completely different from the one Alexandru had built around himself. He slowly pulled over in front of a modest white house with blue shutters. Fresh roses bloomed along the walkway. The wooden gate stood slightly open, exactly as the letter had promised. For several moments he couldn't move. His heartbeat echoed in his ears. What if he was too late? What if his father no longer wanted to see him? What if forgiveness wasn't possible? He finally stepped out of the car. Each footstep toward the gate felt heavier than the last. Then he saw him. Ion was in the garden, carefully trimming the rose bushes. He looked older than Alexandru remembered. His hair was almost completely white now. His shoulders were slightly bent, but his movements were calm, peaceful, almost as if he had been expecting this moment all along. Ion looked up. Their eyes met. Time seemed to stop. Neither man spoke. Neither moved. For several endless seconds they simply stood there. A father and a son, separated not by distance, but by 27 years of silence. Finally, Alexandru took one step forward, then another. His throat tightened. He tried to speak. No words came out. The letter slipped from his trembling hand and fell onto the garden path. Ion immediately recognized it. A gentle smile appeared on his face. "You read it?" Alexandru nodded, his eyes filled with tears. He couldn't finish the sentence. Ion slowly walked toward him. There was no anger in his eyes, no disappointment, only kindness, only love. Alexandru lowered his head. "I'm so sorry." His voice broke completely. "I humiliated you." Another step. "I judged you." Another. I never even let you explain. By now tears were running freely down his face. I spent my entire life believing you abandoned me. He looked directly into his father's eyes. When all along, you were the one protecting me. Without saying a word, Ion closed the final distance between them. Alexandru expected questions, perhaps even resentment. Instead, his father simply opened his arms. And in that instant, the successful millionaire who had spent decades convincing himself he needed no one, became a little boy again. He embraced his father as tightly as he could. Neither of them spoke. They didn't have to. Some apologies are too deep for words. Some forgiveness doesn't require an explanation. Only time and love. They stood there for what felt like an eternity. 2 generations, 2 broken hearts, one embrace that somehow managed to erase decades of pain. When they finally stepped back, neither of them tried to hide the tears. Alexandru wiped his face and looked at his father with regret. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Ion smiled gently. My son. He placed a hand on Alexandru's shoulder. A father's love isn't something you earn. It never disappears. Alexandru shook his head. I threw you out of my wedding. You did. I embarrassed you in front of everyone. You did. I never even gave you the chance to tell me the truth. Ion nodded softly. No. Alexandru lowered his eyes. So, how can you forgive me? Ion's answer came without hesitation, because I never stopped being your father. Silence settled over the garden once again. Not the painful silence of strangers, the peaceful silence of 2 people who no longer needed to hide their feelings. A few minutes later, they sat together on the old wooden bench beneath the apple tree. For hours they talked, about everything, about the years they had lost, about the dreams they had missed, about birthdays celebrated apart, about Christmas mornings that had never felt complete. There was laughter, there were tears, there were long pauses filled with memories, and somehow none of it felt awkward. It felt like home. As the afternoon sun began to set, Ion stood up and disappeared into the house. A moment later, he returned carrying the same small wooden box he had brought to the wedding. This time, Alexandru accepted it with both hands. Slowly, he opened the lid. Inside lay an old family photograph. The edges had faded with time. In the picture, a little boy sat proudly on his father's shoulders while his mother stood beside them, smiling at the camera. Beneath the photograph were carefully preserved childhood drawings, a tiny toy car, a bracelet made from colorful string, and one old brass key. Alexandru picked it up. What's this? Ion smiled. The key to this house. Alexandru looked around. But do you still live here? I do. Then why are you giving it to me? Ion looked directly into his son's eyes. Because a home should never have a locked door for family. If one day you need a place to come, if life ever becomes too heavy, if you ever simply want a cup of coffee with your old father. He gently closed Alexandru's fingers around the key. You'll never have to knock. Alexandru could no longer hold back his emotions. He embraced his father once again. Just then, another car slowly pulled into the driveway. Andrea stepped out. She had followed him. When she saw the 2 men standing together, she smiled through her own tears. She walked toward Ion. I'm so sorry. Before she could finish, Ion hugged her warmly. You have nothing to apologize for. She looked at Alexandru. I've never seen you smile like this. He laughed quietly. I don't think I ever have.
Several months later, Alexandru organized another celebration. It wasn't held in a castle. There were no television cameras, no celebrities, no luxury decorations. It's only close friends, family, and the people who truly mattered. During dinner, Alexandru stood up holding a glass. Everyone became quiet. I used to believe success was measured by money. He looked around the table. I thought expensive cars, successful businesses, and public admiration were proof that I had one in life. He turned toward his father, but I was wrong. His voice grew softer. The greatest wealth any person can have is someone waiting for them with the door still open. Every eye in the room filled with emotion. Alexandru walked over to Ion and embraced him once more. This time, no cameras captured the moment, no reporters wrote about it, no headlines appeared the next morning. It was the most valuable moment of his entire life. Because millions can build a fortune, but only forgiveness can rebuild a family. Sometimes the greatest gift a parent leaves behind isn't money. It isn't property. It isn't success. It's the unconditional love that remains. Even after years of silence, even after unbearable misunderstandings, even after heartbreak. Perhaps the most important lesson of all: never judge someone based on only one side of the story, because the truth often waits quietly for those willing to listen.